if we're talking about star players, we have to bring in our guest this week from CAA agency, Pat Brisson. How are you doing today, Pat?
Doing great. How you doing, guys?
We're doing
Excellent.
great, Pat. Thank you.
You are the co-head of CAA's hockey division, and your client list is a who's who of top centers and other players in the NHL, including Sidney Crosby, Jonathan Toews, John Tavares, and of course, Anze Kopitar. We've got a ton of questions for you specifically about the CBA and about the NHL's return to play plan, but we wanted to start you off with something simple and uncomplicated, and that is your son, Brendan, who is eligible to be drafted this year. And I've seen him ranked anywhere from 26th overall in the prospect rankings to somewhere in the mid-second round. So how proud are you of Brendan?
Well, I'm very proud of him. I mean, he's progressed a lot in the last few years since he went to play at Shattuck St. Mary's when he was 15. He kept progressing in the last couple of years. He grew a little bit. He's finally over 5'11" or so, and got stronger and played on a good team last year. A lot of confidence, and I guess the key with prospect, as we always say, is you got to keep progressing, and that's what he's been able to do, I guess, the last few years. So looking forward to see the next few months, and I guess the draft coming up.
With the Kings having 3 second-round draft picks and Brendan being ranked where he is in the ranking list, there's a possibility he winds up an LA King. Obviously, you won't say that you have a preference for what team he winds up on, but how nice would it be to have him playing somewhere close to home?
Oh, sure, it'd be nice. I mean, I came here. About 30 some years ago, and the Kings. There's a lot of history since then, but from the days of youth hockey, it was almost non-existent 30 years ago to what it became. It became. In the last few years in the 2 cups that the Kings won with 14 and 12, I guess. And having Brendan, growing up in California, sure it'd be special for sure.
Is there a conflict of interest if you were to be his agent, or is he like, Dad, no, I'm going with someone else? What's the business relationship like there? Are you his agent as well?
It's funny because, as we say, sometimes our kids don't listen to us. Sometimes, I repeat a few times, but he's been good that way. I guess he grew up like watching me doing what I do or listening to conversations a lot of times, being in the car and dealing with different situations with players, so we have a good bond that way. We never really talk officially about representation. It's funny.
He could go somewhere else if he wants to.
He's got options, so we'll see what he'll do.
All right, let's get into the CBA, Pat, because I have a million questions, and we're going to start with the return to play. In the negotiation, players were given the option to sit out, no questions asked, of the return to play in Toronto and Edmonton. I'm curious, did you discuss that with your clients? You don't have to get into which one or what the conversations were like, but was this a legitimate concern for every player heading into this resumption of play?
Well, I would say, 2 months ago, perhaps, when the conversations start happening about the possibility of this 24 team concepts. I mean, I had a few players asking questions about. It was more about safety more than anything. But as the negotiations kept going forward, getting closer to a resolution, I didn't have one player really concerned about whether he should play or not. I mean, we did have Max Domi, who's a celiac and is a type 1 diabetic, that we had to approach things a little different for him. He was always in a position of wanting to play, but we had to kind of hold him back a little bit, and making sure that he's in the right environment in order to play. So, but he joined the team, I guess, 5 days after the opening of camps last week, and he's going the right direction.
The CBA being renegotiated along with the decision to return to play seemed beneficial as far as speed of negotiation. Was that more balanced towards the league or the Players Association as far as who got the better of that unusual scenario?
Well, I think in the case of a pandemic like what we were going through, no one expected this to happen, and I give a lot of credit to both the PA and the league for handling everything the way they've had. I mean, it was very quietly done. We were able to do a 6 years labor peace for 6 years, which is good news under the circumstances. Going into this situation without an extension would have been a bit risky on both sides, perhaps. And so I really, truly believe that we found a great balance for both sides. I think some money was deferred. There's a capped escrow on players next year. We all know that no one can dictate or anticipate what kind of revenues we're going to have next year. We all know that we were going to be closer to $4.8 to $5 billion in hockey-related revenues, and there's a possibility next year that no fans in stadiums that we could be close to $2 billion. So that would be a significant drop in revenues where players would have been escrowed at 60%. And in this case, they'll be capped at 20%. And of course, it's a cascade. It's a deal where, if the revenues continue, to hopefully increase over the years 2, 3, and 4. Escrow will be pushed to, there's a cap on 18% year 2, and then 10% year 3, and then 6% the last 3 years. So that's so within the next few years that we recoup and we get back to positive territory where we don't have to be capped at 6. Let's hope that there's even a surplus eventually. But it was handled very well, in my opinion, and it's great for the game the way that we're back, opening next week and on TV.
Before Jesse, I think you're going to dive into the escrow question.
No, not yet.
But before you dive into that, can you explain for some of the fans in chat right now what player escrow is and what that means just in general? And I know Jesse's going to get you to elaborate on it and all the changes that you were just kind of discussing just now. But for anybody who has no idea, what some of these words and terms mean, what is player escrow and what does that mean for a player? Yeah,
I'll try to explain to it in a simple way. It's like a pie of revenues. Let's say we're partners 50-50, and that's the case between the players and the owners. And if you're taking, let's say, $1 million in revenues, to keep it very simple, 500,000 will go to the players and 500,000 to the owners. So in the event that you're projecting, for instance, to have revenues of $1 million, so therefore your revenues, let's say, exceed or for some reason they're not. Let's say revenues are at $900,000 instead of $1 million, and you realize that after the fact, and then you're talking 450 on each side. So the extra $50,000 that was allocated to the players is money that is not there, essentially. So that's why every year players are asked to put aside a certain amount. Sometimes, this year it was going to be 15% in the event that we don't reach the revenues. If there's a surplus of revenues, obviously there'd be a different distribution. So, but it usually takes an extra year or two to go over all the numbers and at the end of the season to make sure that the numbers were at X, and therefore that amount of dollars that were kept in escrow is redistributed to the players based on the actual numbers that were collected. The revenues were collected after a year. So it's easier to explain with a chart sometimes.
Yeah. It sounds like home escrow almost, where they, set aside a certain amount and,
yeah.
I'm hearing some similarities.
I'll try to, the cap on escrow, just to keep it simpler there. So like I said before, if the revenues were going to be, let's say 4.8 billion, that's what it was supposed to be this year. And if we are keeping the cap at 81.5%, that's what we're doing. essentially. And if the revenues are at $2 billion next year, we know that they're significantly, we're talking about 60% less. So therefore, the players would only earn 40% of their dollars. So if you're making $1 million, if you're escrowed at 60%, you'd be making 400,000. So now the players will be capped at 20%. So they'll make the players making $1 million will be guaranteed to make $800,000 in that event, even though the shortfall, even though the gap could be an extra 40%, that will be pushed to the following year till the revenues catch up. So
It's like gap insurance almost.
yeah, it's a good from a player standpoint. You know, if you're signing a 2-year deal, if you have a 5-year deal, you know pretty much exactly what you're going to be earning. Worst case scenario, you know, you make 80% of your money in year 1, you'll make 82% of your money in year 2, guarantees no matter what, and then you go down to 90% and so on and so forth. So it's kind of a guaranteed mechanism that the players were able to negotiate, but in return also there's also deferred. They're deferring 10% of all their salaries next year. So all salaries are deferred 10% to years 4, 5, and 6 of the CBA as well, when the escrow will be capped at 6%. So there's all kinds of things that the players gave up or the owners gave up in order to come to that, I guess, that the solution.
The compensation is deferred, but the cap hit remains the same, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
One of the things that was thrown out there in that explanation was the term hockey-related revenue. And one of the changes was that owners forfeited the playoff revenue for this season in their 50-50 split of hockey-related revenue. And just to make this more complicated for people who don't follow accounting news, things like expansion fees are not included in hockey-related revenue. But it turns out playoff revenue is, but now it's all devoted to the players, correct? For at least for this season?
Yeah, well, so at the season finished, like where it finished, like we had played probably 80% of the games. We had revenue, we had generated close to 80% of the revenues, I guess, at that time. Usually the playoff, like we were en route to probably, like I said, generate about, I would say, $4.8 billion. We were about a $1.2 billion short. At the season finished, like if we had played all the playoffs, TV revenues, playoff revenues, we were to generate an extra $1.2 billion. So that $1.2 billion divided by 2, again, 50%, 600 to the players, is missing. So now, I guess, this concept, the 24-game team concept, that will start on August 1st here, from what I understand, will generate about $400, maybe $450 million to TV only between U.S. and Canada. That will be money going to the pie, so to speak. But we won't catch up to the 1.2 that was going to be there in revenues. But by doing so here, we collectively are going to be able to cut our losses by probably close to $400 million, and that will continue. And there's a lot of cost to the owners during these occurring for these 2 bubbles. I'm not exactly sure how much, but there's a lot of different costs that are related, and it's all coming from the revenues, obviously. So it'll be deducted to the $450 million, I guess, that the TV revenues will bring in. And I'm only estimating. I don't know the numbers exactly, but
sure. One of the, well, not even one of, I would argue the biggest change or the biggest news coming out of this is that the salary cap will stay flat moving forward, at least for 2 or 3 seasons until revenues get up to $4.8 billion, I believe.
Yeah, it could be 2 years. Again, we'll see if the revenues are back in the, from what I understand, near $4 billion. There's a mechanism in place where for every $250 million in HRR, hockey-related revenues, the cap will go up a few points, from what I understand. I'm not so sure the mechanism. So the cap could be flat for 4 years, but it could be flat for 2 or even 1, depending on. It all depends on revenues and how we're going to recoup, so to speak.
But that's a huge impact on teams that are already pressed up against the cap, and an even bigger impact on pending free agents. So are we going to see a lot of players choose short-term contracts so that they can be, either unrestricted free agents or restricted free agents in 3 seasons so that they have an opportunity to negotiate in an environment where the money is available? Or are we going to see players say, gosh, this pandemic proves how fleeting all of this could be, so give me my security, give me the longest term deal I possibly can get? Are we going to see a ton of trades? I mean, how does this changes everybody's strategy, right, across the league? Even Seattle, I would think, would choose players differently based on this.
Yeah, those are all good points, good questions, because I think each player will come as a player base on a player basis based on where you're at in your career. Like some players, if you're 31 years old, I mean, you're going to seek to do probably as long as a contract as you can, no matter what. If you're 25, 26, if you're a restricted free agent, if you're a year away from be a UFA, there's also going to be, because if you're a unrestricted free agent in a year or two from now, but the team that you're playing with, there's no cap space, there's no way for them to pay you fair market value, you may have to go, or the team may have to trade your rights before in order not to lose you as a complete asset going out the door without getting anything in return. So there's going to be a lot of interesting maneuvering of players here. There's going to be teams that are going to benefit from it. There's going to be teams that have a lot of cap space. They're going to end up being able to trade for a really good 26, 27-year-old player making $5 or $6 or $7 million, who would normally be playing on another team, but that other team have no space to keep that player, and they have to move him because they can't see the cap. The cap was going to go from 81.5 to probably 84, 85 this year. That's an extra $4.5 million. Now, if it's going to stay flat for a year or two like this, it definitely is going. It creates kind of a pressure on teams that are against the cap with good assets to having to move those players. It'll be interesting also to see how Seattle is going to cope with this, because in a year from now Seattle may benefit a little bit better than under normal circumstances, because there's going to be 8 to 10 teams with really good assets having to move these players. There's no doubt.
I mean, I'm looking at the free agent list, and I don't know how much you can comment on players that aren't your clients, but I'm looking at Alex Pietrangelo, Braden Holtby, Taylor Hall, Torrey Krug. These are guys who would have otherwise been in line for huge free agent contracts, and now, I mean, I wouldn't even begin to know what they do. It's like you said, there's going to be a lot of maneuvering, and I'm curious to see how it all plans out. There were a lot of smaller changes to the CBA, and I'm curious how much of a voice agents have in advising the Players Association to ask for things. Specifically, the family travel provisions, improved. So now if family members are flying with a player, they fly first class. Teams are paying for travel when it comes to house hunting if they get traded to a new team. Where does an idea like that originate? How does that find its way into the CBA?
Well, those are things that over from CBA to CBA, I mean, those are points that sometimes are left on the table and undone or unapproved, and they wait for the next CBA to bring it back and see if, like the Olympics, for instance. I mean, it wasn't completed in last negotiations, and now it became pretty clear that we have the 2 Olympics. I always call it a moot point, so to speak, because I don't think it's a gain to the players or the owners. I think it's a gain for the game of hockey. The Olympics should be a no-brainer either way, as long as the IOC and the revenues are there from the Olympic Committee and TV rights. But I think it's so beneficial for the game. So going back to the travel and all those points, I mean, I know it's a task list that it sits there during the negotiations, and some of these things get done and some don't. And we're able to improve in that area and other areas that the last, in 2012, the players weren't able to, I guess, to achieve those points. So it's my fourth fourth as an agent, I mean, I was even there 94, 95, and 04, 05, and 2012. So for us, you get to experience different situations, and you get to learn a lot about each of them. And we participate as much as we can by collaborating with our players and our players' voices, and talking to the director of the PA with Don Fear and then Matthew Schneider. I was talking to them on a regular basis and getting feedbacks from them, and talking to players, and also educating players in the sense that sometimes at 22, 24, 25 years old, you're smart, but you haven't been through these situations where we're talking about certain business expertise and acumens and things that are not necessarily complicated after a while to understand, but they're complex when you're in the middle of it for the first time. So for us, we it's our role to engage and also influence, if you want to call it this way, our beliefs over the years and with the amount of experience we've accumulated. And my partner, JP Barry, was working at the PA in the 90s. He was a lawyer at the PA. He was working alongside with Bob Goodenow, and he's been around for a long time. So, and Jim Nice has been with me for 28 years, understands the CBA, and as a capologist, numbers probably better than I do. And so we team up, we talk about it on a regular basis during those hard times, and try to collaborate as best we can with the Players Association and our players.
As you approach, as the players approach creating this new CBA, when does your phone start ringing the most? Is it a couple weeks before? Is it months before? When do your talks kind of pick up in the ways that you were just describing as you're kind of creating this?
Yeah, it's interesting because normally, we wouldn't have been talking much about the CBA until probably this summer. I know they were having ongoing discussions since last October, really good discussions actually, till the pandemic hit, and it became really, in essence, to do an extension before coming back. And normally, I would say, well, the 0405 negotiation, I mean, we were right to it on September 15th. I remember right after the World Cup, the phone was ringing a lot. There was a lot of it was a tough one that year, as we know. The season was canceled, and it was a tough 6 to 8 months or so. The second one in 2012, we were in the middle of it for, till December, till January 5th when it got resolved. There was a lot of conversations, only with players in the PA, but also with owners and general managers. Everyone had an opinion, and those two negotiations were heavier to handle. This past one, I guess everyone seemed to be working. If we look back in 0405, the league wanted to have a cap, a salary cap, and structured, and they fought it hard to get it. Then they ended up getting a hard cap. And 2012 was more about the revenues being equally distributed 50-50 from 57-43. This year, these negotiations, it wasn't really about any of that. Things like guaranteed salaries or length of contracts or signing bonuses, things that there was nothing huge in essence, nothing catalytic to me for worth a work stoppage, in my opinion. And then the pandemic hit all that, and so I think it was a perfect storm. I hate to say it this way. Obviously, you always try to avoid what occurred, but it ended up being a pretty good resolution.
Pat, we've got a bunch of more questions about the CBA, but I don't want to keep you here all day, so I'll just ask one more before we let you go. The Kings traded Jack Campbell and Kyle Clifford to Colorado for a third-round pick that becomes a second-round pick if Kyle Clifford re-signs with the Toronto Maple Leafs. That is no longer allowed. Tying conditional picks to a player re-signing with a team, acquiring them in a trade. I read somewhere that agents felt like tagging those conditions onto the trade decreased the value of the player. I'm curious why that perception existed, and what do you think the impact will be moving forward on trades?
Well, again, it could be beneficial in certain cases, and sometimes not. I mean, sometimes when it's less complicated to have, when the deal is not, involved with, with tagging or too many complexities that comes with a trade. Sometimes it's easier. It could be beneficial in certain situations. I don't see really the value for. I mean, the more options we have from a players' association standpoint, the more options, the more areas that could so-called disturb, if you want to call it this way, create leverage for the player on the other side. You want to keep as for your in order to negotiate a better deal. So when options in situations like this are taken away, you're just reducing the type of leverage, so to speak. So I don't know how it came to that. I wasn't really I wasn't participating in no discussion, and it's not something. It wasn't a topic that really took priority. You know what I mean? A major priority to all the other stuff that was going on.
Sure. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us, Pat. We really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate it. Appreciate your show, and thank you so much. And looking forward to see game one in a week from now.